Shadow of the Erdtree just might be the best Fromsoftware content ever created. It's an absolutely peak expansion and it fills out a lot of the blanks that were left by the main game. In this DLC you follow in the footsteps of Miquella the Kind, and the NPC quests, story and everything tied to it is just amazing. This DLC also holds some of my favorite moments, bosses, environments from Elden Ring and the entirety of the gaming landscape. It's just that good. Of course there are some very few minor issues, but nothing is perfect, so that's fine. I think this DLC achieves a lot. There is a lot of fantastic stuff to be found in this DLC and it was just a blast to explore this. The lore is also just incredible. Sure, some of it has been quite controversial, but I love all of it. It's very good and holds some of the best characters and expands some of the characters from the base game even further to be better characters like Marika. So this DLC is just fantastic. If you enjoy this content and want to see more of Shadow of the Erdtree and different Souls content in the future, please be sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. It would mean a lot to me and it helps out the channel massively. One last time for Shadow of the Erdtree, a spoiler warning: I will spoil everything, lore details, bosses, areas, so if you haven't played this masterpiece, please be sure to do before you watch this video. And with all that said, let's get into it. The lands of Shadow hold some of the most epic and beautiful landscapes I've ever seen in gaming. It's just an incredibly amazing looking realm and arguably even cooler looking than the base game, which already was just stunning to look at. The art direction in this DLC did not let down. It's absolutely fantastic and it's as great as Elden Ring, if not an improvement in nearly all fronts. It's very good. However, not only does this world look gorgeous, it's also filled with very good content. Exploring the legacy dungeons in the realm of Shadow was just great. Bellerat is a great area, even though a bit short, but still great. Anir Illim is also a very good area with fun enemies. And of course, Shadow Keep is probably the best level they've ever made. It's absolutely fascinating. It's so big. It has so many entries. You can tackle it in so many different ways. And it connects to like every region. It's just stunning and the most impressive level they've ever made layout wise, by far. Then there are areas like Raw, which is basically like a hybrid between the open world section and a legacy dungeon, and I really enjoyed this concept, riding there with Torrent and exploring. It was really fun. Great area. The regions are also just fantastic. Jagged Peak looks absolutely fantastic and it's a lead up to one of the coolest bosses ever, Bale. Then Cerulean Coast was so cool to find. Some people say there isn't much, but honestly I think there's plenty of content like the Finger Runes or the Stone Fissure, so it's fine in my opinion. And of course Scattered Altars being the default area of the DLC or something. It's super tightly packed and it's just so fun to explore. Graveside Plain was a great intro too. Overall, just a fantastic map layout. However, there was one thing in the base game a lot of people didn't like. Even I found some of them a bit tedious. The minor dungeons. Because legacy dungeons are fantastic in the main game, but some minor dungeons are a bit lacking. Now, how is this in Shadow of the Erdtree? I have to say that I enjoyed every single minor dungeon in the DLC. They all felt unique, special, and had their own cool gimmicks to make them all stand out. There are the forges where you basically get like a weapon or smithing stones to replace the mines, and I really like those dungeons. Then there are the jails with the pods and those unique enemies, which are really cool. And of course the catacombs that stay from the game, but definitely improved in like every way, trap wise especially, and with gimmicks. So overall it's just fantastic and a blast enjoying every single inch of this DLC. But another important thing is, how are the rewards? A lot of people are let down by the loot in Shadow of the Erdtree, but I don't really understand why. Besides the reward of finding a cool location or some cool set piece or just some very weird looking stuff, which is already rewarding and cool on its own in my opinion, you can find a lot of great stuff in the DLC. Sure, not everyone cares about like 50 cookbooks, and fair enough I guess, but to be honest, it's not like the base game didn't have its baits with the Arteria leaves on purple items, so like it's not like it's a DLC exclusive problem. People over-exaggerate the cookbook problem. There is a lot of cool and unique loot, like new variations of talismans that help you a lot, and of course the new weapons, the 8 weapon types. Sure, some people thought the 100 weapons will be mostly the new weapons, but I never expected that. And I will say even weapons from old categories that return in the DLC are some of my favorites in the series, like the huge sunflower hammer from the Erdtree avatar, or the meteoric or giant greatsword or something, which has one of the most fun Ashes of War art and amazing design. Just love this weapon. It's so fun to use. But of course, I have to mention the weapon categories because, man, these are so fun. Especially as an Odachi main in Nioh 2, seeing the great katanas in Elden Ring was just so fun, and I love these weapons so much. But my favorite honestly might just be the light greatsword, specifically the Milady. This moveset is just so smooth and so fun, and I really enjoyed fighting bosses with it. It's very, very cool. The other weapons I only tested a bit, not too much, and they felt nice. I think they all will have a use and a place. But to be honest, those two weapon types are my favorites and already just enough to reward me. And you also of course find a lot of unique stuff, a lot of cool lore reveals, and I guess smithing stones if you want to upgrade many weapons and you don't want to grind. So yeah, honestly the rewards are fine. But of course the most important thing I need to mention in the rewards are the Shadow Tree fragments. Alright, or the Shadow Tree fragments, Skibidi fragments, I don't know. Apparently it's pronounced Shadow Tree, but the Shadow Tree is so hard etched in my head, so it's hard to kind of get rid of it. Anyways, the Skibidi fragments are a fantastic idea by Fromsoftware to create the sense of having to explore to progress or to feel stronger, because if you don't buff up with Shadow Tree fragments, you will get wrecked in this DLC. Like, it's brutal. These things make such a difference, and they are genuinely implemented wonderfully. I also really love that you find like enough of them for like even level 15 if you just follow the main path of the bosses, which doesn't force you to like explore a lot on replays, which is really good and a great quality of life change. So yeah, I think the loot is overall pretty good in the DLC. Sure, it could be better, but it's definitely not terrible. If exploration and looting are the bones of Elden Ring, the combat is definitely the meat, and we're going to talk about the meat next. Elden Ring's combat is obviously fantastic, and Shadow of the Erdtree brings us some of the most fun enemy encounters and boss encounters in the entirety of Elden Ring. The bosses are just amazing. I already did my Shadow of the Erdtree boss ranking, and the bosses were definitely glazed there a lot. I think I changed my minds on some of the bosses a little bit, especially Meteor being now in the C tier instead of the B tier, because that laser is just bullshit and I genuinely can't believe they put this into the game. But besides that, it has 6 amazing bosses for me, including the Lion, Relana, Midra, Bale, Promised Consort Radahn, which is definitely a controversial one, and I will talk more about him shortly, and of course the best boss in the DLC, pretty easily, Mesmer. Genuinely a flawless, perfect masterpiece. Incredible boss fight. But also the enemies that were introduced are generally very fun, Mesmer soldiers being some of the best fodder enemies, and also just some very good and awesome elite enemies. I personally don't love Cursed Blades as much as most, but I think they're still great enemies overall. So yeah, definitely fantastic combat wise. The encounters throughout the world are very varied and unique. The enemy variety is one of my issues and I will mention it more later, but in general it's still pretty solid and there are still a lot of new enemies that are very fun to fight. And yeah, bosses and mini bosses, fantastic. Love that they put unique bosses at the end of dungeons, like Swordmaster Ons. Very cool stuff. Some people say the boss design has declined since the main game, and I guess there aren't as many positioning branched combos anymore and follow-ups, which is true and is maybe a bit of a shame, but to be honest, I don't mind it too much because the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree were still a blast to figure out and generally just really fun. Some people said they wanted more of Dark Souls 3 bosses, and they say bosses like Midra are more of the Dark Souls 3 design than Elden Ring, and some people wanted more Elden Ring, which in my opinion Mesmer personally fits in very well. That's probably a big reason why he's loved by so many. But what I'm trying to say is you can't really please everyone. Some people will always have their problems and issues with the boss design. And of course there is the most controversial boss in Fromsoftware history, Promised Consort Radahn, which is honestly maybe possibly one of the best bosses ever made, but being held back by so many things. There is of course the terrible double slash move, which is just awful in every way and just a terrible frame trap. It's so bad. And of course there are the bugs and performance issues in this fight, which also plague it and hold it back from becoming one of the best. But this fight does also so much right. The presentation is on point, it looks amazing, the moves are so fun to dodge, besides the double slash. So I think if they fix all of this, he could be one of the best bosses ever made. And in general, I hope the big patch just fixes all the issues in this DLC. It's so close to being absolute perfection, done. And if they just fix stuff like Meteor's Laser, Double Slash, and most importantly the performance, this DLC will be pretty much perfect. Of course, nothing is perfect, and it's the same thing with Shadow of the Erdtree. This is by all means a fantastic expansion, but I still do have a few issues, and I will list them in points. Number 1, the furnace golems, and they honestly are probably my least favorite enemy to fight in the entire game. I don't know, this is such a poor replacement for the Erdtree avatars, who are honestly quite fun to fight in my opinion. But furnace golems, if this was like a special gimmick fight you do once, it would be alright, but especially I think with the huge flame throwing, I don't know, this was just a insanely tedious fight and I really disliked this. At least I know which ones I will never have to fight again because of the rewards, and they look really awesome and add a lot to the world. Number 2, and probably my personal real biggest issue, is the weird reuses and the enemy variety, because this DLC obviously adds a lot of new enemies, but I still felt like at some point the enemy variety was not as big as I hoped for, which is my fault for maybe setting too high expectations for the enemy variety. But like, for example, in Old Hunters, every area was full of new enemies. Now let me add that of course Old Hunters added way less enemies overall than Shadow of the Erdtree, don't get me wrong, but just it felt like they were spread out more evenly, while in the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion it felt like there were definitely a lot of new ones, but some areas just felt like it was full of reuses. And some boss reuses were also not my favorites, especially Jagged Peak Drakes, the Agil reskins. Like, finding the first Ghost Flame was cool, it seemed like a neat remix, but there being 3 and 2 of them being quite annoying encounters also didn't help much. Besides that, there are also some long stretches that don't have much of content, but that wasn't an issue for me. I just enjoyed the ride on Torrent and explored this vast world. But it's still something I want to note because I expected there to be a bit more. With all these minor issues aside, this is still pretty much as close as we get to a perfect DLC, and I don't really want to spend much time complaining. It was just a blast for me to play. However, one issue I really need to point out is the performance issues in Shadow of the Erdtree. On consoles and on PC as well, people unfortunately have experienced quite a few of performance issues, and this is never okay. No one deserves a lesser experience because of technical issues, and compared to the amazing optimization of the base game on the PS5, I had quite a few of lags and stutters in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. They didn't ruin the experience, but it definitely soured it at some parts, especially in the Lion Dancer boss fight. It can get quite severe. So please, FromSoft, in the next patch, please focus on fixing this. This would be very important. What can I even add in the conclusion that hasn't already been repeated ad nauseum in my review? I think this DLC is absolutely amazing and a masterpiece. 10 out of 10, absolutely amazing expansion. Pretty much everything in this DLC was crafted masterfully and as a natural evolution of the Elden Ring base game. The exploration was absolutely amazing. This DLC had some of the most stunning places, locations, and honestly moments in the entirety of the series, and the lore was amazing. I loved the reveal at the end with Miquella and Radahn. I loved the lore with the NPCs and Let Us Follow Us. It was all just so good. And I don't know, I can't really add much more than just say this is absolutely amazing. I wholeheartedly recommend playing this to everyone. It's peak. And with that I can say thank you so much for watching the Shadow of the Erdtree review. If you like this content, please be sure to like and subscribe and support the video. As already mentioned, I would appreciate it a lot and it helps out the channel a ton. If you like more of this content, there is definitely a lot more coming up in the future, so stay tuned for that. And with everything said, have a nice day and bye!